Okay, is that better? I see Colleen. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started today. For our second day of Brailing with the Expert Literacy for All, we have Sue Glazer presenting on Keep It Real with Braille. So, and this is a webinar, so everyone has there are no cameras or microphones available for our participants. And so I'm gonna go ahead and let Sue start sharing her screen.
There you go.
So we are seeing your presenter view. If you want to just
Again, thank you.
You can just do display settings.
Let me make sure I get the right one. Not sure. All right, is that the presenter view again?
That is the presenter view. What you can try is
Do display settings.
under display settings, it can let you swap them. That might fix it.
Okay, hold on a second.
And so this is a week-long workshop that we're doing on all things Braille. So we had a few sessions yesterday. We have more coming up every day for the rest of this week. And everything is being recorded. Oh, Sue, you are muted.
Unmute.
And so all of our webinars, we're using one Zoom link. And then after the sessions of the day has ended, we're having debriefing meetings where you can meet with the people who presented on that day and ask more in-depth follow-up questions if those weren't addressed during those meetings. And there's a separate Zoom link for those where you do not have to register for that. Okay, and so we're seeing the right screen there, and so
Thank you.
Yay! And so our captions are available. So if you click on that live transcript button in your Zoom menu, that should turn those on for you. And as we mentioned before, if you would like to use the chat, you can make sure you click on that field next to the word to change it to all panelists and attendees. And so on our next slide, I think we do have, there's obviously a PowerPoint for this that has not been uploaded to our website just yet. We'll be adding that one. It should be sometime today. And so, yeah, so the links are embedded into the agenda that is on our website. So if there's no link there yet, then it hasn't been posted yet. But we will be adding those handouts as they become available throughout the week. And so for all of our sessions, well, I shouldn't say all, most, the sessions that have an asterisk next to them on our agenda, you can get in-service and AC VREP credit. And of course, you do need an opening and closing code. So for now, the opening code is finger pads. So opening code, finger pads. So you're going to hold on to that, and at the end, we'll give you the closing code and tell you how you can get credit for attending this webinar. All right, and I think that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's so great to see lots of attendees from all over. Nobody had to deal with traffic or hotels and all the not so fun stuff that comes into travel. And you get to still see students today. So that's really great. We designed the workshop so that it would be at different times of the day each day so that hopefully more people can participate. And today we are going to keep it real with Braille. So this is somewhat of a follow-up to yesterday. Some things are going to carry over from the early Braille literacy session that I did, and After my session, Sherry Hart is going to talk about Braille reading options and Braille reading curriculum. So we've got a really nice flow of sessions going on that are going to follow one after the other. So keeping it real with Braille. Our session objectives are going to be to, we're going to talk about so that understand the difference between a visual code, a visual system of reading, and a tactile code. Describe 3 populations of learners who are likely to have difficulty with decoding tasks, and explain at least 3 approaches that develop good Braille readers. All right, so first I want to look at what is Braille. Braille is a tactile code for reading print symbols. Braille is definitely a code. It's not a language. It is, we're using our existing language and we're just taking visual code, which is print, to be able to read tactily. So it's a code. I often hear people talk about it as a language, but that is different. It's composed of 6 raised dots that are designed to fit under the pads of the finger. You notice our opening code was finger pads. So we're not reading with the tips of our fingers. Those who are tactile readers are actually reading with the pads of the fingers. And that's why the 6 dots were arranged and chosen, and the size, orientation, so that they can be perceived at the same time. And Braille is read from left to right, just like print is read from left to right. So there are a lot of skills right in this very, very opening slide that we can already in our head start thinking about. Oh gosh, there's a lot of things that kids need to learn in order to become a good reader, a good tactile reader for sure. Braille is not, so we said it's not a language, doesn't have its own syntax and sentence structure. It's a code. It's a visual. It is not a visual code. Braille is visual for people who are looking at it, but for people who are reading, who actually have to read Braille tactily, it's not a visual code. So I feel like there's some that can be tricky because people who are visual readers, we're going to learn it a different way than someone who's a tactile reader. Braille is not a combination of numbers to be decoded for a tactile reader. It may be for a visual learner, for people who are learning to read and write print, who have vision and will be reading it with vision. Then it was designed with specific number combinations so that one dot could be added after the other in order to come up with all the symbols that were needed. Braille is not read up and down. So think about your scrubbers and rubbers and those who pick at the dots. They are trying to figure out the orientation of those dots, but we really want to encourage them to get all the dots under the pads of their fingers and read from left to right. And they're not to be reading with the palms of their hands. That's definitely not a tactile reading strategy, more for exploration. So I'm going to ask all of you to use your brains a little bit here. First by asking, you're going to do this on your own. So this is where the benefits of a webinar come into play. So we don't have to see anyone getting nervous or putting anybody on the spot. But I want you to look at this worksheet, okay? Something to think about. This is a math worksheet. It says at the top, divide, then decode the secret message. I covered up what the question is, but essentially what you have to do is solve the math problems. And once you get the answer, fill in the corresponding letter that goes with that answer. So the first one, 57 divided by 3 equals 19. If you go to the alphabet code at the top, the box says 19 equals S. So an S was placed in the open box to the right of the 19. So take a few minutes. How many of you maybe have already started? Jot down on paper or keep those letters in your head. So I want you to decode what these 2 words are. The letters on the right are going to spell 2 words. Maybe somebody, if you get it decoded, let us know in the chat box. Uh-oh, somebody said that makes me cringe. Poor Andrea. All right, has anybody decoded the first word or both words? We're off to a good start. Scramble. Scrambled eggs. We got more scrambled eggs, scrambled eggs, scrambled eggs. Awesome. So, yep, those words, those letters decoded from the math problems spell scrambled eggs. So now I have a few questions for some of you. So obviously some of you were able to identify the words. What allowed you? Like why? Why were you able to identify what these words are? Somebody write in the chat box. What skills did you have, or what skills did you use? Math skills, for sure. Some, okay, definitely had to go scanning left and right, up and down, context, playing Wheel of Fortune, nice. So some previous past experiences, knowing how to navigate a page, going through various menus, computation skills, visual skills. Awesome, a lot. You all had all these are all existing skills that you had. So you had to learn them at some point in your life. And the matching. Did anybody experience anxiety when they either first saw this or going through it? I said you only had a few minutes. Knowing that the symbol stood for something, absolutely. So how many people, or you could just type a Y or a no, an N. We had math anxiety. How many folks experienced some level of anxiety, even if it wasn't serious, but just like, ooh, this makes me think. We have no, it's fun. Definitely a little bit of everybody out there. Quite a few yeses, few no's. Yeah, so everybody's different. Everybody has different experiences, and based on what your interests are, maybe what's considered fun for one may not be. It could be considered a horror for another person. Somebody said initially it was fun, but then figured out what to do. Not having a lot of time to work on that activity. I can definitely see that. So the actual, let me move my people around. The actual question was, what did the mixed up hen lay? Ta-da. She laid scrambled eggs. So I hid the initial question because it was very easy to figure out the answer with just a few of the first letters filled in. So I wanted to increase that, keep that anxiety level going a little bit longer for a few folks. But what if the letters were already filled into the boxes? So you open this worksheet and the letters are already here. How much faster would you have been able to read these words? Really fast. So if the letters were already filled in and this worksheet came up, there was no math involved, no decoding, no scanning, tracking, no computation. Probably everybody here could read these letters or read these words within seconds, probably even just a second or just a glance, because we have so many. We all have established reading skills. Exactly. You'd be able to read those in an instant. So think about every time you read something, whether it was a note to a colleague or a friend or a family member, directions, a recipe, an article, a book, a chapter, if you had to go through a decoding process, right? The reason it's so easy for all of us to read scrambled eggs is because we all know, did it come up? Because we all know how to read. These are sight words for us. Our eyes are not looking at one letter at a time. We're not, even with this orientation going vertical instead of horizontal, we glance at this and we see a picture and it's scrambled. It's essentially a sight word, and we're looking at the whole. Our eyes are not looking at an S and keeping it in our head, and then a C, and then an R, and then an A. We're not looking at one letter at a time and then decoding those. But before even getting to that, what if we had to do the math every time? So we actually had to do some kind of extra thinking in order to get to the letter, in order to get to the next letter, to the next letter, to the next letter, and then get back to what the entire word is. So there's a lot of thinking going on there. So I call that code breaking, because essentially we're looking at print, we want to put it into Braille, that's a code. I'm sorry, my mouse keeps sliding around. Okay, code breaking. The print letters are visual symbols, and they stand for language. So print letters, they represent our written language when we want to say things, when we want to read things. It's how we communicate. So we're going to think about print as a code for language. Then we've got raised dots. Raised dots are a tactile symbol, and they stand for print. So those are the Braille dots. The Braille dots are a code for print. So that's already two codes there. We've got Braille dots being a code for print, and we have print being a code for language, for saying what we want to say, for words. But now we've got numerals. So when the Braille code was designed, in order to make sense of it, numbers were assigned to the positions of the dots: a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, and a 6. The numerals for young children, these could honestly just be auditory. These are just sounds for children that don't have number sense, that don't have numeracy yet. If they're still trying to make sense of the world. Think about a 2, a 3, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old that's struggling in other areas, or still just learning. Then these numerals are auditory sounds. They're auditory symbols, and they stand for Braille. So this sound, a 2, a 3, a 1, they don't necessarily have anything to do with reading, right? Unless we already know how to read and we're trying to figure out this code, this cool secret code. They don't have anything to do with reading. They don't have anything to do with positions in space. It's just because we assign them a position. In this context, they don't even have anything to do with quantity, because the dot 3, it's not made up of 3 dots. So a young child trying to learn about Braille, they're trying to also learn about one-to-one correspondence and counting. And now we're talking about a dot 3. Oh, that must be 3 dots. It's just 1 dot. These keep, sorry, every time I move my mouse, I'm jumping ahead too much. The numbers, therefore, are a code for Braille, right? Because we're taking these numbers 1 through 6. They're essentially just a name, because this is what children are hearing. This is what we're saying out loud. So the numerals are a code for Braille. The Braille is a code for print. And then we get to the print, which is a code for language. So that's a lot. Essentially what we're saying, numbers 1 through 6 are this auditory code. They stand for the dots, which are a tactile code. And they stand for print, which are a visual code that stands for the language. The numbers are a code for the dots, they're a code for the print, that all children must break in order to learn how to read and write. But tactile readers, they have to learn to break this code with their fingers. They're not looking at it. They're not taking it all in as quickly as we are. They have a lot more going on. That's a lot of code breaking. It's a lot of time and brain power. So why not eliminate one of those codes and focus on the time and the energy on teaching touch? Because like we said, I said yesterday, children with vision, they don't have to be taught to open their eyes and look around. But children who are reading Braille, they have to be taught how to use their hands and how to explore their world with their hands. So let's focus more on those things. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to do this session is way back in 1999, when I started the program to learn how to be a teacher of children with visual impairments. And I started learning about Braille and all the contractions, and I thought, that's really cool. Kids that read Braille must be really smart. They just figure out that all these different combinations make new sounds and these new symbols that other kids don't have to learn in print. And then I started learning Braille, and I learned about the dot numbers. And immediately I dismissed the dot numbers because it was too much for me. There was too much code breaking going on. And the way that I learned Braille is maybe not how some sighted people learn Braille, but this is what I was taught, was the positions, to know the positions of the Braille and where your fingers go on the Braille writer. So even to this day, if somebody throws out dot numbers to me, my eyes glaze over. If somebody asks me, my name is Sue, what dot numbers make up the letter S? I don't know. I have to do air Braille and make a letter S with my fingers, and then I can decode what those numbers are. Because in my brain, the numbers, they were just adding extra steps that I didn't feel like I had time for. And I didn't want to memorize numbers and then in turn get my fingers to memorize positions. And this is me not reading tactually. This is just reading visually, but producing the Braille kinesthetically. So I just always thought this just seems weird. And then working with children, watching children struggle, seeing the different strategies that are working and not working, and some work for some kids and some don't work for others. I just thought, I'm not the only one that's not seeing things the same way. Some more examples. Look at these. Okay, number 1. How many of you can read number 1 quickly? Very quickly. Who can read number 1 very quickly?
Oops.
That's okay. All right, we got a yes, yes, yes. Probably within seconds, not even a fraction of a second. Speed on the slate will come in time. All right, how many of you can read number 2 fairly quickly? Maybe not as quickly. Yes, yes, yes. Ta-da. What about number 3? So number 1 was written in print. Number 2 was written in sim Braille dots. Number 3, we have some that just tapped out. Not even going to try. That would be me. I would fit into the number 3 of not even trying. How many people can read number 3? Give yourself a minute. We got a nope. Nope. I have to put my fingers in that position. All right, somebody, I know some people, I know people can read it. Lots of people can read it, but how much time? Yep, I could have, I had a lot of time. Took a bit of time. Stepping back now, woo, long process. I have to air Braille it, exactly. I think we need to start an air Braille band. That's what we're getting. So that's kind of the point. Number 1, it's very easy for established Braille reader or established print readers. Again, with number 1, these are all sight words. We're not only are we not looking at the individual letters, we're not looking at the individual words. When we read our visual system, our eyes are actually making very slight movements. You don't even know it, saccadic movements back and forth. And we are picking up chunks of those words at the same time. So when I look at that, I see speed on the slate in one glance, just one look will come in time. So we're just seeing that. It's as if it's the picture now. There's no effort that goes into it. Number 2, we're also reading that visually. I'm not sitting here and thinking about the positions of all of the dots. This is still visual. This is a visual code. I'm reading number 2, the sim Braille, the same way that I'm reading number 1, just reading it a little bit slower because I've looked at Braille for so long and know the position. And I'm sure most TVIs and transcribers, when you look at these dots, they look like letters to you. A musician who's reading sheet music is thinking the same thing. They don't see dots on lines. They actually see the notes. They see what's supposed to be there. But this is us using our visual sense and this visual code. This does not translate to how a tactile reader or a tactile learner is going to be approaching these tasks. Number 3 is also, it's visual, but this number 3 with just the dot numbers, it's taking a lot more brain power. And like I said, people can figure this out. People who learned Braille visually by memorizing the dot numbers and knowing what those corresponding letters are, will be able to read this quickly. Some of us, we sit down and write it out and look at it and think about it, then we'll still be able to read it, but it takes so much more time. It's really difficult to put ourselves into the brain of a 4 or 5-year-old, especially someone who's not had all the lifetime experiences that we've had and who's not developed the fine motor skills and just concepts in the world. So it's very difficult for us to really compare what a young tactile learner might be thinking. So I'm using these examples to just kind of, we can at least have a greater understanding of what's happening in their brains, because there's a lot happening in number 3. It could be fresh. Some people didn't even like it, that was said in the chat box. Some didn't even try because they just thought it would be too much. So I think we've got some decoders on our hands. Uh-oh. It's not never touch a naked bus driver. I mean, well, don't do that either, but we're close. Did anybody else figure out? Did anybody else figure out number 3? Trust, Kelly filled in there. Never trust a naked bus driver. And so now, what does that mean? What's the context? Why are we even saying that? It doesn't mean anything. So again, think about the perspective of children. They don't know literacy. They're learning about literacy. They're learning about their world. They're learning about concepts. We ask them questions all the time that might not make any sense at all. And now they're decoding words, letters and words, and that might not make any sense either. So are they doing it right? They may not know if they don't have this background knowledge and experience and why that came. So yes, Cynthia, you don't want to touch or trust is my advice for today.
So Sue, could you just read part of number 3? Because I think we have some people who aren't able to access.
Yeah, thank you. Number 3 is just a series of dot numbers. So it says 6, comma, 1, 3, 4, 5, comma, 5, comma, 1, 5. And then there's a space. Then we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, comma, 1, 2, 3, 5, comma, 1, 3, 6, comma, 3, 4, space, 1, space, 1, 3, 4, 5, comma, 1, comma, 1, 3, comma, 1, 2, 4, 6, space, 1, 2, comma, 1, 3, 6, comma, 2, 3, 4, space, 1, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 5, comma, 2, 4, comma, 1, 2, 3, 6, comma, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, comma, 2, 5, 6. Yes, that's. I'm super impressed with everyone who can look at those numbers and see letters. I'm very, very impressed.
We do have a couple people with their hand raised. I don't know if you want to take questions now or if there's a break coming up that might be.
We could, I have another example, but yeah, I can. Do they type their question in the chat box, or you give them a mic?
Lowered their hand. Heather, you have your hand raised. Did you have a question? I can give you the microphone. Oh, lowered the, okay. All of our hands have been lowered. All
okay,
right, if anyone does
probably a little bit like me.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, about learning the slate. Yes. So one very, very big reason for not using numbers is exactly for that reason, for learning how to use a slate and stylus. If we talk about positions of the Braille dots, so the first side having a top, a middle, and a bottom, and a second side having a top in the middle and a bottom. So if we're looking at the example that's on the screen, number 2 in Sim Braille, we have the capitalization indicator and then the letter I. If you look at the first side of the first cell, there's nothing filled in. The second side of the first cell, the bottom dot is filled in. So it's second side, bottom. The second side that we come to when we're reading it tactually or visually, we're going from the first side is nothing, the second side is a dot on the bottom. When you write on the slate, the first side that you're going to write is still going to be nothing, and the second side will be the bottom, the second side bottom. So because you're going in a different direction when you're writing on the slate, it's still going to be the first side that you're coming to. So if you start all on the far right, the first side that you come to is still going to be nothing. The second side you come to is going to be the bottom. So that's, we can talk about that more in the debriefing room, but that's a really good question. But that's a great reason why it's helpful to teach positions versus numbers. Yes, much easier on the slate for kids, and for some of us grown-ups. Those of you with the very rare super brains can look at these numbers and see letters and words, and again, that's incredibly impressive. Just for fun, because like I said, we cannot imagine what it's like to be a pre-K kindergarten student, or a student who's learning English and Braille at the same time, or a student that has a learning disability, because we are probably, most people here are established readers, whether print or Braille, and have experienced a good level of education. So I came up with my own code to try to illustrate that for some children, saying the names of numbers are just sounds. At a certain point, they're sounds. And then later on, those numbers are going to get assigned different attributes that don't have anything to do with decoding words. So my question for you is, are you evacuating for the hurricane? There's no hurricane coming. It's not breaking news. This is just a question. Are you evacuating for the hurricane? The answer is spelled out, and I'll give you a hint. It's 2 words. Gi, gen, dab, gen, bat, sep, lerp makes up the first word. The letters of the second word are dak, lerp, wek, lerp. And at the bottom, I've got the code for you to break. An A equals gen, an E equals lerp, an H equals dak, the M equals dob, an N equals gi, an S is the same as bot, a T is sep, and an R is wek. So who can answer that question? We got some. Namaste here. Are you evacuating for the hurricane? Namaste here. So this came from a yoga person, and we had it on our board during one hurricane season, I think when everyone was hightailing it, and we decided namaste here. So how quickly, somebody said got it, but needed a pen and paper. Right, so for some people, this is not just an auditory thing that you can keep in your head. If it is, maybe because it's 1 word or 2 words, you can keep it in your head. But what if this was sentences and it went on and on and on and on? How much time do you have to spend to go back and forth? Versus if the answer was just written in the visual code that we already know. The letters also are all lowercase, and it's 1 sound per letter. There is no capitalization indicator. There's no punctuation, no exclamation point. It's just 1 sound per letter. But think about the Braille letter N, that uses 4 sounds. If we use the dot numbers, which I now have to do my air Braille, again, 1, 3, 4, 5, that's 4 sounds to get somebody to remember what the letter N is, when we can just show them kinesthetically where that position, where their fingers go on a Braille writer, or talk about the positions, which we will get to a little bit later. So some people might be feeling frustrated looking at all these numbers and nonsense words and coding. Some people might be feeling accomplished, thinking like, oh, this was fun. This is a challenging task. Oh, I figured it out. Some people might want to competitive with yourself. How quickly can I answer these kinds of worksheets and questions and things? And some people are just done. Like, meh, I hope she doesn't have any more examples like this. This is not fun. So yes, puzzles can be cool when that's the objective, when the objective is challenging your brain and figuring out a code and actually decoding. But if all of your brain power is used, or a lot of your brain power, mental capacity is used to figure out what the question is, to figure out what makes up the answer, then how much is left over for understanding the concepts and for developing that comprehension and greater understanding of just literacy and using that for the world. So want to look at struggling learners. Just think about young children are learning numeracy and literacy at the same time. It's not it's not that kids learn how to read and then they learn how to do math. These things are happening simultaneously. They're learning how to rote count. They have to learn what one-to-one correspondence is with lots and lots of examples of hands-on concrete examples. They're developing the number sense, learning about seriation, conservation, quantity, comparisons, learning about patterns. The computation was mentioned earlier. So they're learning all these things. There are lots and lots of prerequisite skills to develop good math students. There are also lots of prerequisite skills to develop good readers, have literacy. So attaching meanings to numbers and quantity through hands-on activities is how kids are learning about math and learning that one-to-one correspondence. And that if you have 2 of something, we call it 2, and you physically have 2 of something. It's not just an arbitrary name or number that's assigned to a position in space. So think about young children who lack incidental learning and or early intervention. So thinking about children with visual impairments, not all of them, but many children with visual impairments are going to be struggling in a lot of areas if they don't have the early intervention skills or early intervention resources and services available to them, if they don't grow up in a household where they're getting lots and lots of experiences, if their families don't know. How would their families know if they haven't been taught what the children need or how they learn? So children who are lacking incidental learning, they're not picking up all these skills that they need. They're not mimicking people using their hands. They're not mimicking people reading with their hands. They don't know that that's what's happening. Children with additional disabilities. So we could have a child with learning disabilities. So on top of being visually impaired, having very low vision or not having any vision at all, they could have a learning disability, an intellectual disability, may have autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit disorder, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They may have a physical disability or a severe medical condition that prevents them from being involved, having a lot of exploration with their environment, just being available for all kinds of learning experiences. So on top of learning literacy skills, learning numeracy skills, these children that have other disabilities, it's going to interrupt their learning process, and they're going to have to, they're thinking a lot harder to accomplish maybe simple tasks and things that others without disabilities just do without even thinking. We've got print readers, so established print readers that have a progressive vision loss. So maybe they already learned how to read print, but because of their progressive loss, we're trying to teach them how to read Braille and how to read tactily. So we have to think about that these kids need to learn how to read tactily. But what if they're already struggling as print readers? If they never really fully grasp phonics skills and how to decode, if they have poor comprehension, if they have poor or slow fluency, which leads to low comprehension, if they don't have a huge knowledge base, if they don't have vocabulary, they're already struggling in maybe all subjects. So giving them a new code to learn a new way of doing something that they're already having a difficult time of doing, that's going to be extremely challenging. It could be very, very frustrating. They may can get to the point where they memorize the visual orientation of the dots. So print readers, and I've seen this before, I've seen kids walking around with flashcards and they have the dots blown up or written in just really fun, bright colors or really large using a Sharpie marker. And I watch them holding it really close to their faces and they're memorizing the dot positions. They're memorizing the dot numbers, or maybe they're just memorizing the visual orientation. They know what the Braille looks like, but that's not going to help them to know what the Braille feels like. It's not going to transfer immediately or directly or maybe at all to that tactile sense. What could happen, and this is what I do, we did an activity at a conference one time where I had the blindfold on and I had my trusty sighted guide with me, and we were supposed to find things around the hotel to help us. It was an orientation activity, get back to where we were. So the first thing I thought is, well, I have to know where I am. So I found a Braille sign, a Braille door number outside of the room, and I know what Braille looks like. If I was looking at it, if it didn't have print numbers on it, I would know what that room number was, but I didn't. So I used my fingers, and I used very, very poor tactile skills, and I actually used my fingernail, and I picked at all the dots, all the little plastic dots on the sign, and I figured out what the room number was. And I was so proud of myself. And it probably took a good 4 or 5 minutes. Maybe not that long, but it took a really long time. But as a visual learner, I resorted to, I know what it looks like. So now I just have to take my fingers and find those positions. And that could be why some established print readers are struggling transferring to that tactile learning, that tactile reading, is because they've got in their head a picture of what it's supposed to look like, and they want to use their hand. It's it's logical. They want to use their fingers to try to figure out where those dots belong, so that they can then transfer that into a letter, and then remember that letter, and then go on to the next set of dots and pick those apart, and then remember that letter. And then they get through all the letters of the first word, they've got to put those all back together again. Again, it's just taking a lot of time. So just throwing out a lot of things to think about. Let's see, ESOL students. So think about learners whose first language is not English. Some strategies that are kind of known to use with kids whose first language is not English is, it could be using pictures and showing them and pairing the pictures with the English word. Well, that doesn't help if a child can't see the pictures. So we're already, kids who are Braille readers and they don't speak, or they're tactile learners, they don't speak the language, they've got even more going against them, because now they hear all these instructions and directions being given to them, but they don't understand what those mean. So they need even more hands-on experiences and focus on the tactile sense, on tactile perception. They might know numbers. I've met several students who came from another country. They are maybe established or struggling learners in their home country, but when we get to numbers, their eyes light up and they see the numbers, or they hear numbers, and they can quickly associate those numbers with a one-to-one correspondence, or maybe have more success with computational skills. But then we start telling them, if they have to learn Braille, that these numbers now mean something completely different. If you want to learn English, you have to now use these numbers in a different way. So it can just be confusing, just giving lots of examples of how I can definitely understand kids being confused about some ways of approaching these populations. Are encouraged to read letters based on combinations of numbers. They have to determine what sounds those letters make. Then they have to put the series of letters together, and they have to decode the word. The focus is not on literacy here. The focus is on code breaking, essentially, which can be fun for somebody, again, who already has all these established skills. But it also is going to be very time consuming and slow. They might learn in one lesson that a 1 and a 2 means 3. But then they get to another class or another lesson and they have to read the word ball, but now they're told 1 and a 2 makes the B sound. So which is it? Is a 1 and a 2 a 3, or is a 1 and a 2 a B? Just more examples of how I can definitely see that could be confusing for kids. And I've seen kids in situations like this where they are very confused. They're trying to learn how to write their name, and they're learning numbers to write their name that makes these specific sounds, but then they're also expected to do math lessons where they're using those same numbers, but they mean something different. Let's look at what a good Braille reader looks like. So often think about, when I think about a good Braille reader, I think about their Braille reading mechanics. Some characteristics of good Braille readers are that they have few or no regressive hand movements. Their fingers are moving forward, not back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, not up and down. They're reading from left to right. Using both hands. Good Braille readers use both hands, at least 4 fingers. The other fingers, I call them, and I've read this somewhere, I'm sure, detective fingers. You have the fingers on the right hand that are kind of, think about that they're going out there on reconnaissance to figure out what's coming, take a sneak peek of what to prepare for. And then I've read studies and just in talking to really efficient Braille readers that most of that identifying is going to come from their index fingers. So by the time their index fingers get to the characters, that's where they've got it. Their detective fingers have given them a sneak preview and now they're good to go. But those trailing fingers are also going to be important. They're going to let the reader know, help them stay online and help them keep track and know what has just passed. And the lead fingers are going to find the end of the line first. And they're all working together, and hands are moving, and good Braille readers, hands are moving independently of one another. They can look at 2 different things. Their brain can perceive 2 different things at the same time. This is where the tactile sense has some secret powers. Everything's vision is so cool. But our tactile sense, tactile perception, it does something that vision can't do. So if everybody, you don't have to do it now, but at some point today or tomorrow, take 2 different objects and put one object in each pocket. You have to have wearing something that has pockets, or something in a drawer, something in front of you, something behind you. Put a different object in each hand at the same time. Your brain, so maybe you have a key in your left hand and you have a quarter in your right hand. Your brain can perceive both of those items at the same time. And you can be thinking about the ridges of the teeth, the sharp teeth on the key, or the ridges on the quarter. So you can actually, at the same time, 2 different hands, you're perceiving all of these things together. But you can't do that with your eyes. You can't have one eye looking at a recipe or a note and then another eye reading an article, or looking at an article and reading both of those at the same time. So the eyes aren't that cool when it comes to perceiving at the same time. It's very difficult to figure out how to get your eyes to look at 2 different things at the same time. But it's not going to happen. One, they're both going to automatically focus on the same thing, or one will just get blurry. You're not going to see. Maybe you see 2 things with your peripheral vision. You're like, I can see 2 things at once, but you're not really seeing the detail and not getting everything that tactile sense is getting. So it's possible. It's possible for kids to learn how to use both hands independently. But also understanding kids that have multiple disabilities are going to learn these skills at different levels. But the tactile ability is there for many kids. So using their hands independently is going to allow them to read one line with the first hand and then have the next hand go down and start reading the next. Good Braille readers, they've got a slow, steady, consistent pace. Fast Braille readers are going to be faster, but it's going to be a steady pace with a very light touch. They're not pressing down. They're not picking at the Braille. They're reading with the Braille under the pads of their fingers, not with their fingertips. Someone reading with their fingertips, they're only going to perceive the dots that are in the upper portion of the cell. They're going to miss what's down below. Good Braille readers will should have their feet on the floor. Their arms are going to be parallel to the floor. Their fingers are going to be at an acute angle to the Braille. So not flat, dry, sliding across the Braille, but not in the position where if their arms are not parallel, then their fingertips are touching the Braille. So the pads of their fingers will be running across the Braille. That's what's going to get them all of the dots under their fingers at the same time without having to go up and down, without having to rub back and forth. And again, that's obviously that's ideal. Kids that have other disabilities or don't have as many experiences, don't have all that emergent literacy behind them, are going to be struggling for sure. Let me see. So what makes a good Braille reader? Are we seeing this slide, what makes a good Braille reader?
Yes.
Okay, I've got 3 different things showing. We want to focus on the skills that are needed to make good Braille readers. And when I say a good Braille reader, I'm automatically referring to tactile reader, a tactile reader. They need that emergent literacy that we talked about yesterday, meaningful experiences and lots and lots and lots of concept development. They need those experiences that are varied, interactive, concrete, unifying, and hands-on. Doing household chores, daily living skills, participating in day-to-day activities, developing skills to be a good tactile reader. They need hand skills, hand and finger strength. So just the muscle strength to hold and carry, the finger dexterity, putting a button through a buttonhole, putting coins into a slot machine or a vending machine, wrist rotation, being able to rotate wrists, palms up, palms down, the owner rotation, so going side to side, and the waving rotation, as if they're waving to someone, and the modulation of movement. They have to be able to regulate their motor responses to sensory input. So that's where that light touch is going to come in, and steady moving. They need lots of tactile skills, tracking, identification, tactile discrimination, matching, lots and lots of hands-on, lots of experiences using their hands to discriminate what's underneath and being able to compare. With tactile discrimination, we want to start with large, solid geometric shapes and then move on to smaller geometric shapes. Then transfer that to flat shapes, eventually looking at tactile embossed shapes, which are then going to lead to Braille. There are programs out there like the hands-on functional activities for preschoolers that I talked about yesterday to encourage lots of hand movement activities and development, but also programs that APH has like Teaching Touch. And we've got the Mangold programs, and Sherry's going to talk about some of the Braille programs tomorrow for more formal Braille literacy. They need exposure to Braille and Braille that fits under the pads of their fingers. They need Braille everywhere. They need to see and be involved with people using Braille so that they have those models. They need it in books and greeting cards, games, playing cards, the Rubik's Cube, even instructions when they get a new game. APH, all their games come with Braille instructions. Don't throw those away. Let the kids get their hands on them, even if they're 3 or 4 years old, or if they're 14 years old. If they're not reading Braille, that's okay. Sighted kids at 2 and 3 years old are not reading print, but we're still exposing them to print. I think that I hear that a lot from educators that are not in the field of visual impairment. They'll say, well, he's not reading Braille anyway. Why do we have to have it? Why do I need this special teacher to make all this Braille in the classroom? He can't even read it. And I always just say, well, let's look around. Look at all the print that's in this classroom. Look at all the print that these children, other children are seeing on a day-to-day basis. And they don't know how to read print either, but they're trying and they're being exposed to it. Even the grocery lists, leaving notes around on jewelry or charms or keychains, having just a list of Braille labels that can be peeled off and placed on things, so they have their name on their chair, on their desk, on their hook, on their backpack. Lots and lots of Braille under their fingers and real Braille. We want to teach Braille with Braille. There are lots of activities that can be done, like tracking activities, and this can be for all ages. For younger children, we can use the On the Way to Literacy books like The Longest Noodle and Silly Squiggles. We can use the Picture Maker by Wheatley to create tracking activities and games. The Beginning with Braille by Anna Swenson has tons and tons of ideas to create tracking worksheets to come up with stories. I made a really quick tracking exercise based on going to a pumpkin patch. So I brought my trusty little pumpkin today that I borrowed from someone, and we have the letter P. So since Halloween is coming up, I might come up with a story for a young child, or I could see an elementary student or a middle school student thinking this was fun. I did goal ball tracking activities, tracking sheets with high school students, and they competed against one another. They each had different tracking worksheets that would say goal, block, line out, had different terminology, goal ball terms in there. And whenever they got to a goal, that's what they earned for their team. and they would race each other to see who could get the most goals or who could get through the fastest. So teenagers are going to be into tracking activities as well. But this one specifically, I would say to the student that we're going to do a pretend field trip to the pumpkin patch, and we have to collect as many pumpkins as we can, that they're all over the field. It would be really helpful if the child had experience with a farm, with a field, with pumpkins, so we can at least bring in a pumpkin, even if you can't get to a farm. And they're tracking the lines. Every time they find the letter P, P says pa, and it stands for the pumpkin. And so they have to go from the beginning to the end of every line quickly, because they're not reading anything else. They're not decoding. They're not looking for numbers or listening for numbers. They're feeling. They're just using tactile perception to move forward and keep moving forward until they find what's different. They may not know that this is a letter P. They could not identify this letter P in any other setting. But right now, at this time, they've been told this is the letter P. So we're going to move quickly and look for all these P's. And they doing activities like this over and over and over again with isolated letters, and then slowly adding in alternate letters. Think about the Mangold Tactile Development Program. Then eventually they're going to learn that this is what the P feels like. Homemade books. We talked about lots about homemade books yesterday, doing concept books, having children make those books. It's going to get them the hand skills that they need. And alphabet object books would be great for isolating and reinforcing individual letters. And attributes. We want to look at the attributes of Braille. Braille has its own attributes. We don't need to assign it arbitrary numbers for someone who's learning tactily. They have Braille, a Braille cell has its own attributes. It has 2 columns, and it has 3 dots in each column. So it has the first side with a dot at the top, a dot in the middle, a dot at the bottom. It has a second side with a dot at the top, the middle, and the bottom. Those are positions that shows the position of the actual dot. And those are spatial concepts that all children are learning, and they come into play in other aspects of their life. So they're learning this authentically and purposefully, and it's transferable accurately to many, many different areas. If anyone's ever used that program, Handwriting Without Tears, to teach sighted children the position of just making of print letters, they talk about the top, the middle, and the bottom. They have songs about the top and starting at the top, and you start your letters at the top, because they know when children are sitting down at a table and they have a pencil and a paper, we want to get them to start writing the letters from the top. So we're not talking about going north. We're not talking about position 1. They're actually talking about the physical position at the top. So let's use the positions when we're referring to something that comes with positions. Kinesthetic, when using a Braille writer, teach them muscle memory. Just like in a typing class, in my typing class, I wasn't even allowed to look at the keys. We had paper covering our hands. All I was allowed to know were my fingers, my index fingers were on the keys that had the little bumps on them. And that was an F and a J. And from there, I just did what the teacher said, and I pressed down the fingers that she told me and moved them in different positions. So I had to know what my fingers were, the index finger, a middle finger, a ring finger, a pinky finger. That's something that all children need. They need that body awareness, and then that muscle memory. Just like if your electricity goes out in your house, you walk into the bathroom, your hand flips up the switch behind you, and then you realize, oh, I don't need the light. You're standing in front of the sink, you reach forward and you grab your toothbrush. You grab the handle, the faucet, or the handle to turn on the faucet on the water. You don't have to look. You've done it so many times, you know where it is. And that's what we want to get kids used to on the Braille writer, that they've done it so many times, they know where it is. Like playing an instrument, their fingers are on the keys and they move because of lots and lots and lots of repetition and doing it over and over again. Lots of repetition. We want to teach playing with toys. Oh, yes.
So it's 1:33. Just wanted to make sure you were aware of your time.
Thank you. I think
You're
this is the
welcome.
last one, and then we're going to show our video.
Okay.
All right. Good deal. So we want to teach Braille with Braille, teach playing with toys. So toys are for playing. playing and toys can teach so many prerequisite skills that are needed for tactile learning. They teach so many skills that are needed for life. Playing teaches kids problem-solving skills, social skills, that turn-taking, how to get invited into a peer group, how to request to get into a peer group, that creativity and imagination. They learn about cause and effect. They're learning a lot of literacy concepts. They're learning the skills that they need to develop literacy skills. Toys aren't specifically designed to teach reading. We have reading curriculums, we have targeted strategies to teach reading, but they can reinforce literacy concepts, and they can reinforce what's needed to learn literacy. And there are so many fun looking, visually appealing, I would say, crafts, and we call it crafty Braille, giant dots, just really fun arts and crafts kinds of things that are terrific for bringing awareness about Braille, bringing awareness to classmates, to friends, to family members, that Braille is a thing, that it's a code. In those senses, it's a visual code. When we're using ginormous dots, even things like the tactiles and the Taptillo have really big bumps on them. They serve a lot of great uses to help with positional concepts and spatial and developing skills needed for literacy, but they are not specifically Braille. They don't fit under the pads of fingertips. So kids are going to be using the palms of their hands. They're going to be exploring, as they should be with all kinds of toys, the tiny cracks and crevices and different textures and movable parts. So we want to really just keep that in mind when we're teaching Braille. We want to keep it real and use real Braille to teach Braille. And Braille can appear on toys, but if it's fitting under their fingertips, then we can use it to reinforce letters and the Braille reading concepts. If it's not, then let's use it for all the hand skills and the creativity and the social skills and the problem solving that kids also need to learn. We have a really special video from Donna McNear. She's an independent educational consultant in Minnesota, but she's talking about turning on touch thinking and reflection. So she's going to reflect on her teaching and learning and some research of how the brain works, how tactile learning works. So we're going to listen to her, kind of give an overview.
Welcome to Touch Thinking, Reflections on Braille Teaching and Learning. And I want to begin by a big thank you to Andrea Wallace and the Florida Instructional Materials Center for the visually impaired for the invitation to join your conference. I'm inspired by your professional development opportunity Welcome to Touch Thinking, I'm inspired by your professional development opportunity in your state. The fall 2020 Brailling with the Experts, Literacy for All. Your agenda is robust with relevant and timely information for us to change our teaching narrative with evolving and responsive practices. So I am honored to speak briefly today about a topic I've been calling turning on touch thinking. So I'm Donna McNear, and I was a long time career teacher for children who are blind and visually impaired, and a certified orientation and mobility specialist in Minnesota. And for the past 11 years, I'm Welcome to Touch Countries and so forth. And as part of that technical assistance, I do what I call parent work, and that helps keep me informed about what is important to parents and families. I also give to supports to IEP teams, and I am responsible for some instruction with students and student outcomes. So as a consultant, after all these years, I like to think of myself as still involved in teaching, responsible for teaching, and staying relevant regarding what we need to do for kids for their outcomes. So I'm going to share in the the little bit of time we have together on touch thinking and some key ideas. So I like to use the term evolving and responsive practices, especially in the time we are in 2020. And because we have to continually evolve in the context that we're living and working and teaching in, and be responsive to practices and think about what's effective for children today. So part of that has been my evolving and responsive practices over the last 15 years when I think about touch thinking. So I'm going to talk about 3 key ideas, which are tactile learning, effective instruction, and implementation supports. And I just want to share in this photo that's on this slide is a former student of mine from many years ago. And he was a very interesting student for me, because when he was a young boy in kindergarten, he was making progress on all his goals except Braille reading. And that's when I really had to examine and think through what I was doing for instruction and reshape and evolve in my practices. So some of that is shared today. So I want to share just a little bit about tactile learning and influences for me as a teacher. And I want to begin with Emerson Folk. Now, some of you who have been in the field for a long time are probably smiling as I bring up Emerson Folk. And what I want to share is when I was in teacher training in the mid-1970s, he was a person who was up front and center in the content in my Braille courses. And he has done a lot of research. And those of you who don't know about the career of Emerson Folk, I really encourage you to take some time and look him up on the internet. You can find a bit of his work, and I think you'd enjoy reading it. But there's something that I learned way back in the mid-70s that has influenced my work in Braille instruction all these many years. And that's his concept of the tactual field of view. And what that has to do is our finger pads and what we can perceive tactually under our finger pads. So I just want you to keep that in mind also. And then other influences through the years are all the collegial research and dialogue that's been ongoing. And I just want to give a mention to the ABC Braille study, which is one of the more recent robust research done in Braille and teaching and learning. So I just want to draw your attention to that. And then the other influences around tactile learner are the children and the students. And I've had the opportunity to teach children who I call complicated and complex. They're the children that have maybe not made expected progress in their tactile Braille reading skills. And I've had the privilege of joining a number of teams over the past 15 years in assisting problem solving and implementing instruction and supports to help those children make progress in tactile Braille reading. And then I've also had the opportunity to teach in many diverse contexts. And some of those are remote islands in the Western Pacific Ocean, and have seen children who had no exposure to tactile reading. And when we show them and introduce them to typical Braille reading, they can pick up on those tactile symbols and make some progress in Braille reading. So I also then want to flip into the science of brain development in early childhood. And there's a lot going on, and I want to share a couple quotes with you from Dr. Jacob Toller, and he's the Dean of the Medical School and Vice President for Clinical Affairs here at the University of Minnesota. And my path has crossed with him for a number of years, and I asked him for some information about where they're going with brain development, because they're opening up a whole new center focusing on the brain, and they're going to launch the physical structure, I believe, in a year, but they're putting together all the people and what they're going to be doing. And he says during critical periods, particularly a baby's first 1,000 days, and then also in adolescence, the brain still has the ability to rewire its connections and make positive, lasting changes. Early intervention is often a key. Now, I know this probably isn't a new concept for most of us, but it's an important concept to keep in mind as we think about Braille instruction and tactile learning. And what's going on in the brain. So here's another quote that is from some content from the Masonic Institute for the Developing Brain, which is the center I referred to at the University of Minnesota. And the center says the vast majority of brain growth, 80%, happens before a child turns 3 years old. During this critical period, 700 new neural connections form every second. It's a time of incredible potential for on-track brain development that can lead to a bright future, or, and I'll just leave it there. So another important message about the brain. So where I take that information for myself and from all those influences and experiences is a critical condition for me about learning Braille. And that has to do with Braille size. Simply, it needs to fit under the finger pad. We are going to get better results with kids reading Braille if we give them frequent exposure to Braille that fits under the finger pad. So when we think about tactile learning and engaging the brain in finger pad thinking, so I want to say that atypical Braille representations can become what I call language thinking, number thinking, and complicated with extra steps in learning. And my experience says this can affect our children with what I'm going to refer to as neural developmental differences. So we know that many of our children who are blind and visually impaired and who we are teaching to be tactile learners, they can be also affected by a variety of conditions that affect their brain, that affect their thinking and their neurological development. So when I think about how do we respond to this? This is one of my favorite photos to just illustrate how I perceive sometimes how our brain responds when there's just basically too much information out there. So I have a photo here of an aisle in a grocery store that's just jam-packed with stuff. And in the aisle, there's this person, it looks like a man laying down in the aisle. And the communication from this photo is that he's just totally overwhelmed. So I keep this photo in mind because I think about what we're doing with children sometimes when we're overwhelming them in the teaching and learning context. And what can we do about that with effective instruction? So I think we need to create opportunities for learning real Braille through these just really two important elements and of frequency and variety. And those of you who have listened to me talk on a variety of subjects around effective instruction know that I typically talk about frequency and variety is the key elements in effective instruction. So frequency just means the amount of opportunities we can expose a child to something we want them to learn. And variety just means how many ways can we expose them to what we want them to learn. And so when we think about teaching Braille and effective instruction, we want to create many opportunities to experience real Braille under the finger pad. And we want to create a variety of opportunities and ways. So I just want to share a little bit about the photo on this slide. And this is a young friend of mine who is blind. And if you look in the photo, it might not be obvious who the child is who's blind and who needs to be the tactile learner. And on the left side of the photo is my friend, and who is the tactile learner. And this is when he's a preschooler. And then in the middle is his older brother, and he's fully sighted and has no disabilities. And then on the right side happens to be my grandson, Aiden, who's fully sighted with no disabilities. But when I think about Braille and instruction with young children, I think about two elements, which is, I think, explicit instruction, and I think playful instruction. And this is an example of what I would refer to as playful instruction. So I'm including other children in this young boy's world around frequent and variety opportunities to learn Braille. And it may not be obvious how the child is learning Braille, but it's what I call a holistic approach. And I like to include peers in instruction and make learning fun. So this is playful instruction. And I also want to say at this point that when I do playful instruction around Braille, this is when I may include representations of Braille that are other size. It may be Braille that does not fit under the finger pad. It might be other toys and other visual representations of Braille that make it a great opportunity to include sighted friends and sighted peers and family members in that holistic approach and environment to playing and talking about Braille. But then I also want to point out that the effective instruction also includes explicit instruction, and that's when I'm more intentional and deliberate about what I'm teaching the child who's going to be a Braille reader around Braille. So another element I want to talk about in terms of effective instruction and Braille is the concept of disrupting sequence. That is something key to how I approach instruction. So what do I mean by that is I think about the concept of ready. And oftentimes we've inherited curriculum and strategies about teaching a child. It can be many aspects of literacy instruction, but there's that concept of when they're ready, that's when you teach them. And so I have a tendency to disrupt that sequence and that concept of ready, because I think ready is very early. And if we think back to early brain development and those quotes from Dr. Tolar, I like to think children are ready when they're born. So when and how do I disrupt sequence? Here is a photo of my friend with when he's a preschooler, and his fingers are on a refreshable Braille device that's integrated with a computer. So what I was doing, what I call playful instruction here, showing him a variety of ways Braille is represented and can fit under his finger pad. So I like to push in a variety of materials and tools from the beginning to give a child's brain that opportunity to connect with touch thinking and what's under their finger pad. So the third area I would just want to talk about is implementation supports. And I frequently in my talk about effective instruction include this quote from our very esteemed and well-remembered colleague, Alan Koenig, and at the time, Carol Fahrenkopf, who was doing a lot of work with Alan. And their quote is, "Since literacy instruction is integrated within all other areas of the curriculum throughout the day, specialized services must also be available throughout the school day." So what I always think about with this quote is that we have to find ways to implement Braille throughout a student's environment, no matter what their age is. And so I like to think about how we can create touch thinking opportunities with Braille through being highly collaborative. So having collaboration with a lot of people in a child's life. So when they're young, it's their parents, it's other team members, it's other caregivers, and working with them to create those opportunities with real Braille. And when I am in a highly collaborative way of working with people, I think about coaching and guiding from the side to help implement those effective instruction strategies. And then this is just a fun little thing I think about for supports for myself. I always like to include a literacy goal for a child, even when they're very young. So from birth to 3 years old, I like to create a literacy goal. So often a very young child's goals are around therapy, and I like to make sure there's a literacy goal. And when I think about implementing and creating that, what we call a Braille-rich environment, I also like to create a literacy goal for myself. And what do I need to support a child with Braille instruction? What do I need to push into their environment? And I make that my own goal. So I just shared with you some key ideas about touch thinking and some ideas for you for your own evolving and responsive practices. So the key ideas is to think about tactile learning, effective instruction, and implementation supports. So I want to share with you a closing thought. And that is that as teachers for students with visual impairments, many of us are involved with children for many, many years. And we have what I call the long view. So in this photo on the left side of the screen is a photo of when I was my young friend's teacher. And I just cherish and treasure the opportunities I had to know him as a baby, because there he is on the right side as an 8th grader and very competent with his own recording studio that he was that he set up in his basement. And when I think of all the students I've known and children and our work with supporting Braille literacy skills, I think about when they're young and having the long view. So I encourage you to treasure that aspect of our thinking. And so I want to thank you for participating and listening to this session about touch thinking. And I hope you have a really good conference and that you have had a good conference. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
So that was really insightful information and just reminder of teaching to that tactile sense. You know, it's just at 2 o'clock, so I want to just show the resources I use, very similar to yesterday, beginning with Braille, instructional strategies for Braille literacy, everyday activities calendar, the hands-on program that APH has, on the way to literacy, teaching touch, the picture maker by Wheatley, and touch. Stuck. Okay.
Hi. All right. Thank you, Sue, for another wonderful presentation and reminding us to keep Braille real and not make it more complicated than it needs to be. So I think there's some very good food for thought in there. So for all of you attending, if you could complete this survey for our webinar with 4 very short questions that we're required to ask for the Florida Department of Education, we report those answers back to them so we can show what we're doing and how we're serving you. And you can access that survey using this QR code or the bit.ly FIMC-eval, or the link is always on the events page of our website. So we appreciate you taking the time to do that survey for us. And so our closing code for those of you looking for in-service and or ACVREP credit is HANDS, HANDS, HANDS. And so in order to get that credit, what you're going to do is go to our form, which you can access using this different QR code, the bit.ly with FIMC-CEUS, or that link is also on the events page of our website. And you're going to fill out that form, put in those opening and closing codes, and then you will receive your certificate for participation. And these sessions are all 1.5 credits. All right, and I think that is it. So we are going to take a break until 2:30. If you come back and join us, then we have Sherry Hart, another one of our staff members here at the Florida Instructional Materials Center for the Visually Impaired. She is presenting on, let me make sure I have the correct title, Lots of Dots, an overview of Braille instructional resources. So if you want to see all of the resources out there on teaching Braille to students, resources for parents and teachers, definitely come back and join us at 2 o'clock. And then our debriefing session will be at 3:30. So hopefully we see you there. And Valeria, so the closing code is hands. We want to use our hands and our finger pads. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us.
Cool.
And
thank you.
thank you to Sue and our capturer, and we will see you in a bit.